The Arabian Nights Entertainments by Andrew Lang. Preface. The stories in the fairy books have generally been such as old women in country places tell to their grandchildren. Nobody knows how old they are, or who told them first. The children of Ham, Shem and Japhet may have listened to them in the ark on wet days. Hector's little boy may have heard them in Troy town, for it is certain that Homer knew them, and that some of them were written down in Egypt about the time of Moses. People in different countries tell them differently, but they are always the same stories, really, whether among little Zulus at the Cape or little Eskimo near the North Pole. The changes are only in matters of manners and customs, such as wearing clothes or not, meeting lions who talk in the warm countries, or talking bears in the cold countries. There are plenty of kings and queens in the fairy tales, just because long ago there were plenty of kings in the country. A gentleman who would be a squire now was a kind of king in Scotland in very old times, and the same in other places. These old stories, never forgotten, were taken down in writing in different ages, but mostly in this century, in all sorts of languages. These ancient stories are the contents of the fairy books. Now the Arabian Nights, some of which, but not nearly all, are given in this volume, are only fairy tales of the East. The people of Asia, Arabia, and Persia told them in their own way, not for children, but for grown-up people. There were no novels then, nor any printed books, of course. But there were people whose profession it was to amuse men and women by telling tales. They dressed the fairy stories up and made the characters good Mohammedans, living in Baghdad or India. The events were often supposed to happen in the reign of the great caliph, or ruler of the faithful, Harun al-Rashid, who lived in Baghdad in 786 to 808 AD. The vizier who accompanies the caliph was also a real person of the great family of the Barmecides. He was put to death by the caliph in a very cruel way. Nobody ever knew why. The stories must have been told in their present shape a good long while after the caliph died, when nobody knew very exactly what had really happened. At last some storyteller thought of writing down the tales and fixing them into a kind of framework, as if they had all been narrated to a cruel sultan by his wife. Probably the tales were written down about the time when Edward I was fighting Robert Bruce. But changes were made in them at different times, and a great deal that is very dull and stupid was put in, and plenty of verses. Neither the verses nor the dull pieces are given in this book. People in France and England knew almost nothing about the Arabian Nights till the reigns of Queen Anne and George I, when they were translated into French by Monsieur Galland. Grown-up people were then very fond of fairy tales, and they thought these Arab stories the best that they had ever read. They were delighted with ghouls, who lived among the tombs, and genii, who seemed to be a kind of ogres, and with princesses who work magic spells, and with Paris, who are Arab fairies. Sinbad had adventures which perhaps came out of the Odyssey of Homer. In fact, all the East had contributed its wonders, and sent them to Europe in one parcel. Young men once made a noise at Monsieur Galland's windows in the dead of night, and asked him to tell them one of his marvelous tales. Nobody talked of anything but dervishes and viziers, rocks and Paris. The stories were translated from French into all languages, and only Bishop Atterbury complained that the tales were not likely to be true and had no moral. The bishop was presently banished for being on the side of Prince Charlie's father, and had leisure to repent of being so solemn. In this book, the Arabian Nights are translated from the French version of Monsieur Galland, who dropped out the poetry and a great deal of what the Arabian authors thought funny, though it seems wearisome to us. In this book the stories are shortened here and there, and omissions are made of pieces only suitable for Arabs and old gentlemen. The translations are by the writers of the tales in the fairy books, and the pictures are by Mr. Ford. I can remember reading the Arabian Nights, when I was 6 years old, in dirty yellow old volumes of small type with no pictures, and I hope children who read them with Mr. Ford's pictures will be as happy as I was then in the company of Aladdin and Sinbad the Sailor. The Arabian Nights. In the chronicles of the ancient dynasty of the Sassanidae, who reigned for about 400 years, from Persia to the borders of China, beyond the great river Ganges itself, we read the praises of one of the kings of this race, who was said to be the best monarch of his time. His subjects loved him, and his neighbors feared him, and when he died he left his kingdom in a more prosperous and powerful condition than any king had done before him. The two sons who survived him loved each other tenderly, and it was a real grief to the elder Shahryar that the laws of the empire forbade him to share his dominions with his brother Scotsman. Indeed, after 10 years, during which this state of things had not ceased to trouble him, Shahryar cut off the country of Great Tartary from the Persian Empire and made his brother king. Now the Sultan Shahryar had a wife whom he loved more than all the world, and his greatest happiness was to surround her with splendor, and to give her the finest dresses and the most beautiful jewels. It was therefore with the deepest shame and sorrow that he accidentally discovered, after several years, that she had deceived him completely, and her whole conduct turned out to have been so bad, that he felt himself obliged to carry out the law of the land, and order the Grand Vizier to put her to death. The blow was so heavy that his mind almost gave way, and he declared that he was quite sure that at bottom all women were as wicked as the Sultana, if you could only find them out, and that the fewer the world contained the better. So every evening he married a fresh wife, and had her strangled the following morning before the Grand Vizier, whose duty it was to provide these unhappy brides for the Sultan. The poor man fulfilled his task with reluctance, but there was no escape, and every day saw a girl married and a wife dead. This behavior caused the greatest horror in the town, where nothing was heard but cries and lamentations. In one house was a father weeping for the loss of his daughter, in another perhaps a mother trembling for the fate of her child. And instead of the blessings that had formerly been heaped on the Sultan's head, the air was now full of curses. The Grand Vizier himself was the father of 2 daughters, of whom the elder was called Scheherazade, and the younger Dinarzade. Dinarzade had no particular gifts to distinguish her from other girls, but her sister was clever and courageous in the highest degree. Her father had given her the best masters in philosophy, medicine, history, and the fine arts, and besides all this, her beauty excelled that of any girl in the kingdom of Persia. One day, when the Grand Vizier was talking to his eldest daughter, who was his delight and pride, Scheherazade said to him, "Father, I have a favor to ask of you. Will you grant it to me?" "I can refuse you nothing," replied he. "That is just and reasonable." "Then listen," said Scheherazade. "I am determined to stop this barbarous practice of the sultans, and to deliver the girls and mothers from the awful fate that hangs over them." "It would be an excellent thing to do," returned the Grand Vizier, "but how do you propose to accomplish it?" "My father," answered Scheherazade, "it is you who have to provide the Sultan daily with a fresh wife, and I implore you, by all the affection you bear me, to allow the honor to fall upon me." "Have you lost your senses?" cried the Grand Vizier, starting back in horror. "What has put such a thing into your head? You ought to know by this time what it means to be the Sultan's bride." "Yes, my father, I know it well," replied she, "and I am not afraid to think of it. If I fail, my death will be a glorious one, and if I succeed I shall have done a great service to my country." "It is of no use," said the Grand Vizier. "I shall never consent. If the Sultan was to order me to plunge a dagger in your heart, I should have to obey. What a task for a father! Ah, if you do not fear death, fear at any rate the anguish you would cause me." "Once again, my father," said Scheherazade, "will you grant me what I ask?" "What, are you still so obstinate?" exclaimed the Grand Vizier. "Why are you so resolved upon your own ruin?" But the maiden absolutely refused to attend to her father's words, and at length, in despair, the Grand Vizier was obliged to give way, and went sadly to the palace to tell the Sultan that the following evening he would bring him Scheherazade. The Sultan received this news with the greatest astonishment. "How have you made up your mind," he asked, "to sacrifice your own daughter to me?" "Sire," answered the Grand Vizier, "it is her own wish. Even the sad fate that awaits her could not hold her back." "Let there be no mistake, Vizier," said the Sultan. "Remember you will have to take her life yourself. If you refuse, I swear that your head shall pay forfeit." "Sire," returned the Vizier, "whatever the cost, I will obey you. Though a father, I am also your subject." So the Sultan told the Grand Vizier he might bring his daughter as soon as he liked. The Vizier took back this news to Scheherazade, who received it as if it had been the most pleasant thing in the world. She thanked her father warmly for yielding to her wishes, and seeing him still bowed down with grief, told him that she hoped he would never repent having allowed her to marry the Sultan. Then she went to prepare herself for the marriage, and begged that her sister Dinarzade should be sent for to speak to her. When they were alone, Scheherazade addressed her thus: "My dear sister, I want your help in a very important affair. My father is going to take me to the palace to celebrate my marriage with the Sultan. When His Highness receives me, I shall beg him, as a last favor, to let you sleep in our chamber, so that I may have your company during the last night I am alive. If, as I hope, he grants me my wish, be sure that you wake me an hour before the dawn, and speak to me in these words. My sister, if you are not asleep, I beg you, before the sun rises, to tell me one of your charming stories. Then I shall begin, and I hope by this means to deliver the people from the terror that reigns over them." Dinarzade replied that she would do with pleasure what her sister wished. When the usual hour arrived, the Grand Vizier conducted Scheherazade to the palace, and left her alone with the Sultan, who bade her raise her veil, and was amazed at her beauty. But seeing her eyes full of tears, he asked what was the matter. "Sire," replied Scheherazade, "I have a sister who loves me as tenderly as I love her. Grant me the favor of allowing her to sleep this night in the same room, as it is the last we shall be together." Shahryar consented to Scheherazade's petition, and Dinarzade was sent for. An hour before daybreak, Dinarzade awoke and exclaimed, as she had promised, "My dear sister, if you are not asleep, tell me, I pray you, before the sun rises, one of your charming stories. It is the last time that I shall have the pleasure of hearing you." Scheherazade did not answer her sister, but turned to the Sultan. "Will your Highness permit me to do as my sister asks?" said she. "Willingly," he answered. So Scheherazade began. The Story of the Merchant and the Genius. Sire, there was once upon a time a merchant who possessed great wealth, in land and merchandise, as well as in ready money. He was obliged from time to time to take journeys to arrange his affairs. One day, having to go a long way from home, he mounted his horse, taking with him a small wallet in which he had put a few biscuits and dates, because he had to pass through the desert where no food was to be got. He arrived without any mishap, and having finished his business, set out on his return. On the 4th day of his journey, the heat of the sun being very great, he turned out of his road to rest under some trees. He found at the foot of a large walnut tree a fountain of clear and running water. He dismounted, fastened his horse to a branch of the tree, and sat by the fountain, after having taken from his wallet some of his dates and biscuits. When he had finished this frugal meal, he washed his face and hands in the fountain. When he was thus employed, he saw an enormous genius, white with rage, coming towards him, with a scimitar in his hand. "Arise," he cried in a terrible voice, "and let me kill you as you have killed my son." As he uttered these words, he gave a frightful yell. The merchant, quite as much terrified at the hideous face of the monster as at his words, answered him tremblingly, "Alas, good sir, what can I have done to you to deserve death?" "I shall kill you," repeated the genius, "as you have killed my son." "But," said the merchant, "how can I have killed your son? I do not know him, and I have never even seen him." "When you arrived here, did you not sit down on the ground?" asked the genius. "And did you not take some dates from your wallet, and whilst eating them did not you throw the stones about?" "Yes," said the merchant, "I certainly did so." "Then," said the genius, "I tell you, you have killed my son, for whilst you were throwing about the stones, my son passed by, and one of them struck him in the eye and killed him. So I shall kill you." "Ah, sir, forgive me," cried the merchant. "I will have no mercy on you," answered the genius. "But I killed your son quite unintentionally, so I implore you to spare my life." "No," said the genius, "I shall kill you as you killed my son." And so saying, he seized the merchant by the arm, threw him on the ground, and lifted his saber to cut off his head. The merchant, protesting his innocence, bewailed his wife and children, and tried pitifully to avert his fate. The genius, with his raised scimitar, waited till he had finished, but was not in the least touched. Scheherazade, at this point, seeing that it was day, and knowing that the Sultan always rose very early to attend the council, stopped speaking. "Indeed, sister," said Dinarzade, "this is a wonderful story." "The rest is still more wonderful," replied Scheherazade. "And you would say so, if the Sultan would allow me to live another day, and would give me leave to tell it to you the next night." Shahryar, who had been listening to Scheherazade with pleasure, said to himself, "I will wait till tomorrow. I can always have her killed when I have heard the end of her story." All this time the Grand Vizier was in a terrible state of anxiety. But he was much delighted when he saw the Sultan enter the council chamber without giving the terrible command that he was expecting. The next morning, before the day broke, Dinarzade said to her sister, "Dear sister, if you are awake, I pray you to go on with your story." The Sultan did not wait for Scheherazade to ask his leave. "Finish," said he, "the story of the genius and the merchant. I am curious to hear the end." So Scheherazade went on with the story. This happened every morning. The sultana told a story, and the sultan let her live to finish it. When the merchant saw that the genius was determined to cut off his head, he said, "One word more, I entreat you. Grant me a little delay, just a short time to go home and bid my wife and children farewell, and to make my will. When I have done this, I will come back here, and you shall kill me." "But," said the genius, "if I grant you the delay you ask, I am afraid that you will not come back." "I give you my word of honor," answered the merchant, "that I will come back without fail." "How long do you require?" asked the genius. "I ask you for a year's grace," replied the merchant. "I promise you that tomorrow 12-month, I shall be waiting under these trees to give myself up to you." On this the genius left him near the fountain and disappeared. The merchant, having recovered from his fright, mounted his horse and went on his road. When he arrived home, his wife and children received him with the greatest joy. But instead of embracing them, he began to weep so bitterly that they soon guessed that something terrible was the matter. "Tell us, I pray you," said his wife, "what has happened?" "Alas," answered her husband, "I have only a year to live." Then he told them what had passed between him and the genius, and how he had given his word to return at the end of a year to be killed. When they heard this sad news, they were in despair and wept much. The next day the merchant began to settle his affairs, and first of all to pay his debts. He gave presents to his friends and large alms to the poor. He set his slaves at liberty and provided for his wife and children. The year soon passed away, and he was obliged to depart. When he tried to say goodbye, he was quite overcome with grief, and with difficulty tore himself away. At length he reached the place where he had first seen the genius, on the very day that he had appointed. He dismounted, and sat down at the edge of the fountain, where he awaited the genius in terrible suspense. Whilst he was thus waiting, an old man leading a hind came towards him. They greeted one another, and then the old man said to him, "May I ask, brother, what brought you to this desert place, where there are so many evil genii about? To see these beautiful trees, one would imagine it was inhabited, but it is a dangerous place to stop long in." The merchant told the old man why he was obliged to come there. He listened in astonishment. "This is a most marvelous affair. I should like to be a witness of your interview with the genius." So saying, he sat down by the merchant. While they were talking, another old man came up, followed by 2 black dogs. He greeted them, and asked what they were doing in this place. The old man who was leading the hind told him the adventure of the merchant and the genius. The second old man had not sooner heard the story than he, too, decided to stay there to see what would happen. He sat down by the others and was talking when a third old man arrived. He asked why the merchant who was with them looked so sad. They told him the story, and he also resolved to see what would pass between the genius and the merchant, so waited with the rest. They soon saw in the distance a thick smoke, like a cloud of dust. This smoke came nearer and nearer, and then all at once it vanished, and they saw the genius, who, without speaking to them, approached the merchant, sword in hand, and taking him by the arm, said, "Get up and let me kill you as you killed my son." The merchant and the 3 old men began to weep and groan. Then the old man leading the hind threw himself at the monster's feet and said, "O Prince of the Genii, I beg of you to stay your fury and to listen to me. I am going to tell you my story and that of the hind I have with me, and if you find it more marvelous than that of the merchant whom you are about to kill, I hope that you will do away with a third part of his punishment." The genius considered some time, and then he said, "Very well, I agree to this." The story of the first old man and of the hind. "I am now going to begin my story," said the old man. "So please attend. This hind that you see with me is my wife. We have no children of our own. Therefore I adopted the son of a favorite slave and determined to make him my heir. My wife, however, took a great dislike to both mother and child, which she concealed from me till too late. When my adopted son was about 10 years old, I was obliged to go on a journey. Before I went, I entrusted to my wife's keeping both the mother and child, and begged her to take care of them during my absence, which lasted a whole year. During this time she studied magic in order to carry out her wicked scheme. When she had learned enough, she took my son into a distant place and changed him into a calf. Then she gave him to my steward and told him to look after a calf she had bought. She also changed the slave into a cow, which she sent to my steward. When I returned, I inquired after my slave and the child. "Your slave is dead," she said, "and as for your son, I have not seen him for 2 months, and I do not know where he is." I was grieved to hear of my slave's death, but as my son had only disappeared, I thought I should soon find him. 8 months, however, passed, and still no tidings of him. Then the feast of Bairam came. To celebrate it, I ordered my steward to bring me a very fat cow to sacrifice. He did so. The cow that he brought was my unfortunate slave. I bound her, but just as I was about to kill her, she began to low most piteously, and I saw that her eyes were streaming with tears. It seemed to me most extraordinary, and feeling a movement of pity, I ordered the steward to lead her away and bring another. My wife, who was present, scoffed at my compassion, which made her malice of no avail. "What are you doing?" she cried. "Kill this cow. It is the best we have to sacrifice." To please her, I tried again, but again the animal's lows and tears disarmed me. "Take her away," I said to the steward, "and kill her I cannot." The steward killed her, but on skinning her found that she was nothing but bones, although she appeared so fat. I was vexed. "Keep her for yourself," I said to the steward, "and if you have a fat calf, bring that in her stead." In a short time he brought a very fat calf, which, although I did not know it, was my son. It tried hard to break its cord and come to me. It threw itself at my feet, with its head on the ground, as if it wished to excite my pity, and to beg me not to take away its life. I was even more surprised and touched at this action than I had been at the tears of the cow. "Go," I said to the steward, "take back this calf, take great care of it, and bring me another in its place instantly." As soon as my wife heard me speak this, she at once cried out, "What are you doing, husband? Do not sacrifice any calf but this." "Wife," I answered, "I will not sacrifice this calf." And in spite of all her remonstrances, I remained firm. I had another calf killed. This one was led away. The next day the steward asked to speak to me in private. "I have come," he said, "to tell you some news which I think you will like to hear. I have a daughter who knows magic. Yesterday, when I was leading back the calf which you refused to sacrifice, I noticed that she smiled, and then directly afterwards began to cry. I asked her why she did so. 'Father,' she answered, 'this calf is the son of our master. I smile with joy at seeing him still alive, and I weep to think of his mother, who was sacrificed yesterday as a cow. These changes have been wrought by our master's wife, who hated the mother and son.'" At these words of genius, continued the old man, I leave you to imagine my astonishment. I went immediately with the steward to speak with his daughter myself. First of all, I went to the stable to see my son, and he replied in his dumb way to all my caresses. When the steward's daughter came, I asked her if she could change my son back to his proper shape. "Yes, I can," she replied, "on 2 conditions. One is that you will give him to me for a husband, and the other is that you will let me punish the woman who changed him into a calf." "To the first condition," I answered, "I agree with all my heart, and I will give you an ample dowry. To the second I also agree. I only beg you to spare her life." "That I will do," she replied. "I will treat her as she treated your son." Then she took a vessel of water and pronounced over it some words I did not understand. Then, on throwing the water over him, he became immediately a young man once more. "My son, my dear son," I exclaimed, kissing him in a transport of joy. "This kind maiden has rescued you from a terrible enchantment, and I am sure that out of gratitude you will marry her." He consented joyfully, but before they were married, the young girl changed my wife into a hind, and it is she whom you see before you. I wished her to have this form rather than a stranger one, so that we could see her in the family without repugnance. Since then my son has become a widower and has gone traveling. I am now going in search of him, and not wishing to confide my wife to the care of other people, I am taking her with me. Is this not a most marvelous tale? "It is indeed," said the genius, "and because of it I grant to you the 3rd part of the punishment of this merchant." When the first old man had finished his story, the second, who was leading the 2 black dogs, said to the genius, "I am going to tell you what happened to me, and I am sure that you will find my story even more astonishing than the one to which you have just been listening. But when I have related it, will you grant me also the 3rd part of the merchant's punishment?" "Yes," replied the genius, "provided that your story surpasses that of the hind." With this agreement the second old man began in this way. The story of the second old man, and of the 2 black dogs. "Great prince of the genii, you must know that we are 3 brothers, these 2 black dogs and myself. Our father died, leaving us each 1,000 sequins. With this sum we all 3 took up the same profession, and became merchants. A short time after we had opened our shops, my eldest brother, one of these two dogs, resolved to travel in foreign countries for the sake of merchandise. With this intention, he sold all he had and bought merchandise suitable to the voyages he was about to make. He set out and was away a whole year. At the end of this time, a beggar came to my shop. "Good day," I said. "Good day," he answered. "Is it possible that you do not recognize me?" Then I looked at him closely and saw he was my brother. I made him come into my house and asked him how he had fared in his enterprise. "Do not question me," he replied. "See me, you see all I have. It would but renew my trouble to tell of all the misfortunes that have befallen me in a year and have brought me to this state." I shut up my shop, paid him every attention, taking him to the bath, giving him my most beautiful robes. I examined my accounts and found that I had doubled my capital, that is, that I now possessed 2,000 sequins. I gave my brother half, saying, "Now, brother, you can forget your losses." He accepted them with joy, and we lived together as we had before. Some time afterwards, my second brother wished also to sell his business and travel. My eldest brother and I did all we could to dissuade him, but it was of no use. He joined a caravan and set out. He came back at the end of a year in the same state as his elder brother. I took care of him, and as I had 1,000 sequins to spare, I gave them to him, and he reopened his shop. One day, my two brothers came to me to propose that we should make a journey and trade. At first I refused to go. "You traveled," I said, "and what did you gain?" But they came to me repeatedly, and after having held out for 5 years, I at last gave way. But when they had made their preparation, and they began to buy the merchandise we needed, they found they had spent every piece of the 1,000 sequins I had given them. I did not reproach them. I divided my 6,000 sequins with them, giving 1,000 to each and keeping one for myself, and the other 3 I buried in a corner of my house. We bought merchandise, loaded a vessel with it, and set forth with a favorable wind. After 2 months' sailing, we arrived at a seaport, where we disembarked and did a great trade. Then we bought the merchandise of the country, and were just going to sail once more, when I was stopped on the shore by a beautiful though poorly dressed woman. She came up to me, kissed my hand, and implored me to marry her and take her on board. At first I refused, but she begged so hard and promised to be such a good wife to me, that at last I consented. I got her some beautiful dresses, and after having married her, we embarked and set sail. During the voyage, I discovered so many good qualities in my wife that I began to love her more and more. But my brothers began to be jealous of my prosperity, and set to work to plot against my life. One night when we were sleeping, they threw my wife and myself into the sea. My wife, however, was a fairy, and so she did not let me drown, but transported me to an island. When the day dawned, she said to me, "When I saw you on the seashore, I took a great fancy to you, and wished to try your good nature. So I presented myself in the disguise you saw. Now I have rewarded you by saving your life. But I am very angry with your brothers, and I shall not rest till I have taken their lives." I thanked the fairy for all that she had done for me, but I begged her not to kill my brothers. I appeased her wrath, and in a moment she transported me from the island where we were to the roof of my house, and she disappeared a moment afterwards. I went down and opened the doors and dug up the 3,000 sequins which I had buried. I went to the place where my shop was, opened it, and received from my fellow merchants congratulations on my return. When I went home, I saw 2 black dogs who came to meet me with sorrowful faces. I was much astonished, but the fairy who reappeared said to me, "Do not be surprised to see these dogs. They are your 2 brothers. I have condemned them to remain for 10 years in these shapes." Then, having told me where I could hear news of her, she vanished. The 10 years are nearly past, and I am on the road to find her. As in passing I met this merchant and the old man with the hind, I stayed with them. This is my history, O Prince of Genii. Do you not think it is a most marvelous one? "Yes, indeed," replied the genius, "and I will give up to you the third of the merchant's punishment." Then the third old man made the genius the same request as the other 2 had done, and the genius promised him the last third of the merchant's punishment if his story surpassed both the others. So he told his story to the genius, but I cannot tell you what it was, as I do not know. But I do know that it was even more marvelous than either of the others, so that the genius was astonished and said to the third old man, "I will give up to you the third part of the merchant's punishment. He ought to thank all 3 of you for having interested yourselves in his favor. But for you, he would be here no longer." So saying, he disappeared, to the great joy of the company. The merchant did not fail to thank his friends, and then each went on his way. The merchant returned to his wife and children, and passed the rest of his days happily with them. But sire, added Scheherazade, however beautiful are the stories I have just told you, they cannot compare with the story of the fisherman. The story of the fisherman. Sire, there was once upon a time a fisherman so old and so poor that he could scarcely manage to support his wife and 3 children. He went every day to fish very early, and each day he made a rule not to throw his nets more than 4 times. He started out one morning by moonlight and came to the seashore. He undressed and threw his nets, and as he was drawing them towards the bank he felt a great weight. Though he had caught a large fish, and he felt very pleased. But a moment afterwards, seeing that instead of a fish he only had in his nets the carcass of an ass, he was much disappointed. Vexed with having such a bad haul, when he had mended his nets, which the carcass of the ass had broken in several places, he threw them a second time. In drawing them in he again felt a great weight, so that he thought they were full of fish. But he only found a large basket full of rubbish. He was much annoyed. "O fortune," he cried, "do not trifle thus with me, a poor fisherman who can hardly support his family." So saying, he threw away the rubbish, and after having washed his nets clean of the dirt, he threw them for the 3rd time. But he only drew in stones, shells, and mud. He was almost in despair. Then he threw his nets for the 4th time. When he thought he had a fish, he drew them in with a great deal of trouble. There was no fish, however, but he found a yellow pot, which by its weight seemed full of something, and he noticed that it was fastened and sealed with lead, with the impression of a seal. He was delighted. "I will sell it to the founder," he said. "With the money I shall get for it, I shall buy a measure of wheat." He examined the jar on all sides. He shook it to see if it would rattle. But he heard nothing, and so, judging from the impression of the seal and the lid, he thought there must be something precious inside. To find out, he took his knife, and with a little trouble he opened it. He turned it upside down, but nothing came out, which surprised him very much. He set it in front of him, and whilst he was looking at it attentively, such a thick smoke came out that he had to step back a pace or 2. This smoke rose up to the clouds, and stretching over the sea and the shore, formed a thick mist, which caused the fisherman much astonishment. When all the smoke was out of the jar, it gathered itself together, and became a thick mass in which appeared a genius, twice as large as the largest giant. When he saw such a terrible-looking monster, the fisherman would like to have run away, but he trembled so with fright that he could not move a step. "Great king of the genii," cried the monster, "I will never again disobey you." At these words the fisherman took courage. "What is this you are saying, great genius? Tell me your history and how you came to be shut up in that vase." At this, the genius looked at the fisherman haughtily. "Speak to me more civilly," he said, "before I kill you." "Alas! Why should you kill me?" cried the fisherman. "I have just freed you. Have you already forgotten that?" "No," answered the genius, "but that will not prevent me from killing you, and I am only going to grant you one favor, and that is to choose the manner of your death." "But what have I done to you?" asked the fisherman. "I cannot treat you in any other way," said the genius, "and if you would know why, listen to my story. I rebelled against the king of the genii. To punish me, he shut me up in this vase of copper, and he put on the leaden cover his seal, which is enchantment enough to prevent my coming out. Then he had the vase thrown into the sea. During the first period of my captivity, I vowed that if anyone should free me before 100 years were past, I would make him rich even after his death. But that century passed, and no one freed me. In the 2nd century, I vowed that I would give all the treasures in the world to my deliverer, but he never came. In the 3rd, I promised to make him a king, to be always near him, and to grant him 3 wishes every day. But that century passed away as the other 2 had done, and I remained in the same plight. At last I grew angry at being captive for so long, and I vowed that if anyone would release me, I would kill him at once, and would only allow him to choose in what manner he should die. So you see, as you have freed me today, choose in what way you will die." The fisherman was very unhappy. "What an unlucky man I am to have freed you. I implore you to spare my life." "I have told you," said the genius, "that it is impossible. Choose quickly, you are wasting time." The fisherman began to devise a plot. "Since I must die," he said, "before I choose the manner of my death, I conjure you on your honor to tell me if you really were in that vase." "Yes, I was," answered the genius. I really cannot believe it, said the fisherman. That vase could not contain one of your feet even, and how could your whole body go in? I cannot believe it unless I see you do the thing. Then the genius began to change himself into smoke, which, as before, spread over the sea and the shore, and which, then collecting itself together, began to go back into the vase slowly and evenly till there was nothing left outside. Then a voice came from the vase which said to the fisherman, Well, unbelieving fisherman, here I am in the vase. Do you believe me now? The fisherman, instead of answering, took the lid of lead and shut it down quickly on the vase. Now, O genius, he cried, ask pardon of me and choose by what death you will die. But no, it will be better if I throw you into the sea whence I drew you out. And I will build a house on the shore to warn fishermen who come to cast their nets here, against fishing up such a wicked genius as you are, who vows to kill the man who frees you. At these words the genius did all he could to get out, but he could not, because of the enchantment of the lid. Then he tried to get out by cunning. If you will take off the cover, he said, I will repay you. No, answered the fisherman. If I trust myself to you, I am afraid you will treat me as a certain Greek king treated the physician Douban. Listen, and I will tell you the story of the Greek king and the physician Douban. In the country of Zoman in Persia, there lived a Greek king. This king was a leper, and all his doctors had been unable to cure him, when a very clever physician came to his court. He was very learned in all languages, and knew a great deal about herbs and medicines. As soon as he was told of the king's illness, he put on his best robe and presented himself before the king. Sire, said he, I know that no physician has been able to cure your majesty, but if you will follow my instructions, I will promise to cure you without any medicines or outward application. The king listened to this proposal. If you are clever enough to do this, he said, I promise to make you and your descendants rich forever. The physician went to his house and made a polo club, the handle of which he hollowed out, and put in it the drug he wished to use. Then he made a ball, and with these things he went the next day to the king. He told him that he wished him to play at polo. Accordingly the king mounted his horse and went into the place where he played. There the physician approached him with the bat he had made, saying, Take this, sire, and strike the ball till you feel your hand and whole body in a glow. When the remedy that is in the handle of the club is warmed by your hand, it will penetrate throughout your body. Then you must return to your palace, bathe, and go to sleep, and when you awake tomorrow morning you will be cured. The king took the club and urged his horse after the ball which he had thrown. He struck it, and then it was hit back by the courtiers who were playing with him. When he felt very hot, he stopped playing and went back to the palace, went into the bath, and did all that the physician had said. The next day when he arose he found, to his great joy and astonishment, that he was completely cured. When he entered his audience chamber, all his courtiers, who were eager to see if the wonderful cure had been effected, were overwhelmed with joy. The physician Douban entered the hall and bowed low to the ground. The king, seeing him, called him, made him sit by his side, and showed him every mark of honor. That evening he gave him a long and rich robe of state, and presented him with 2,000 sequins. The following day he continued to load him with favors. Now the king had a grand vizier who was avaricious and envious, and a very bad man. He grew extremely jealous of the physician, and determined to bring about his ruin. In order to do this, he asked to speak in private with the king, saying that he had a most important communication to make. What is it? Asked the king. Sire, answered the grand vizier, it is most dangerous for a monarch to confide in a man whose faithfulness is not proved. You do not know that this physician is not a traitor come here to assassinate you. I am sure, said the king, that this man is the most faithful and virtuous of men. If he wished to take my life, why did he cure me? Cease to speak against him. I see what it is, you are jealous of him, but do not think that I can be turned against him. I remember well what a vizier said to King Sinbad, his master, to prevent him from putting the prince, his son, to death. What the Greek king said excited the vizier's curiosity, and he said to him, Sire, I beg your majesty to have the condescension to tell me what the vizier said to King Sinbad. This vizier, he replied, told King Sinbad that one ought not believe everything that a mother-in-law says, and told him this story. The story of the husband and the parrot. A good man had a beautiful wife, whom he loved passionately, and never left if possible. One day, when he was obliged by important business to go away from her, he went to a place where all kinds of birds are sold and bought a parrot. This parrot not only spoke well, but it had the gift of telling all that had been done before it. He brought it home in a cage, and asked his wife to put it in her room, and take great care of it while he was away. Then he departed. On his return he asked the parrot what had happened during his absence, and the parrot told him some things which made him scold his wife. She thought that one of her slaves must have been telling tales of her, but they told her it was the parrot, and she resolved to revenge herself on him. When her husband next went away for one day, she told on slave to turn under the bird's cage a hand mill, another to throw water down from above the cage, and a third to take a mirror and turn it in front of its eyes, from left to right by the light of a candle. The slaves did this for part of the night, and did it very well. The next day when the husband came back, he asked the parrot what he had seen. The bird replied, "My good master, the lightning, thunder, and rain disturbed me so much all night long, that I cannot tell you what I have suffered." The husband, who knew that it had neither rained nor thundered in the night, was convinced that the parrot was not speaking the truth. So he took him out of the cage, and threw him so roughly on the ground that he killed him. Nevertheless, he was sorry afterwards, for he found that the parrot had spoken the truth. When the Greek king, said the fisherman to the genius, had finished the story of the parrot, he added to the vizier, "And so, vizier, I shall not listen to you, and I shall take care of the physician, in case I repent as the husband did when he had killed the parrot." But the vizier was determined. "Sire," he replied, "the death of the parrot was nothing. But when it is a question of the life of a king, it is better to sacrifice the innocent than save the guilty. It is no uncertain thing, however. The physician Douban wishes to assassinate you. My zeal prompts me to disclose this to your majesty. If I am wrong, I deserve to be punished as a vizier was once punished." "What had the vizier done," said the Greek king, "to merit the punishment?" "I will tell your majesty, if you will do me the honor to listen," answered the vizier. The story of the vizier who was punished. There was once upon a time a king who had a son who was very fond of hunting. He often allowed him to indulge in this pastime, but he had ordered his grand vizier always to go with him, and never to lose sight of him. One day the huntsman roused a stag, and the prince, thinking that the vizier was behind, gave chase and rode so hard that he found himself alone. He stopped, and having lost sight of it, he turned to rejoin the vizier, who had not been careful enough to follow him. But he lost his way. Whilst he was trying to find it, he saw on the side of the road a beautiful lady who was crying bitterly. He drew his horse's rein, and asked her who she was and what she was doing in this place, and if she needed help. "I am the daughter of an Indian king," she answered, "and whilst riding in the country I fell asleep and tumbled off. My horse has run away, and I do not know what has become of him." The young prince had pity on her, and offered to take her behind him, which he did. As they passed by a ruined building, the lady dismounted and went in. The prince also dismounted and followed her. To his great surprise, he heard her saying to someone inside, "Rejoice, my children, I am bringing you a nice fat youth." And other voices replied, "Where is he, mamma, that we may eat him at once, as we are very hungry?" The prince at once saw the danger he was in. He now knew that the lady who said she was the daughter of an Indian king was an ogress, who lived in desolate places, and who by 1,000 wiles surprised and devoured passers-by. He was terrified, and threw himself on his horse. The pretended princess appeared at this moment, and seeing that she had lost her prey, she said to him, "Do not be afraid. What do you want?" "I am lost," he answered, "and I am looking for the road." "Keep straight on," said the ogress, "and you will find it." The prince could hardly believe his ears, and rode off as hard as he could. He found his way, and arrived safe and sound at his father's house, where he told him of the danger he had run because of the Grand Vizier's carelessness. The king was very angry, and had him strangled immediately. "Sire," went on the Vizier to the Greek king, to return to the physician Douban, "if you do not take care, you will repent of having trusted him. Who knows what this remedy, with which he has cured you, may not in time have a bad effect on you." The Greek king was naturally very weak, and did not perceive the wicked intention of his vizier, nor was he firm enough to keep to his first resolution. "Well, vizier," he said, "you are right. Perhaps he did come to take my life. He might do it by the mere smell of one of his drugs. I must see what can be done." "The best means, sire, to put your life in security is to send for him at once, and to cut off his head directly he comes," said the vizier. "I really think," replied the king, "that will be the best way." He then ordered one of his ministers to fetch the physician, who came at once. "I have had you sent for," said the king, "in order to free myself from you by taking your life." The physician was beyond measure astonished when he heard he was to die. "What crimes have I committed, your majesty?" "I have learnt," replied the king, "that you are a spy and intend to kill me. But I will be first and kill you. Strike," he added to an executioner who was by, "and rid me of this assassin." At this cruel order the physician threw himself on his knees. "Spare my life," he cried, "and yours will be spared." The fisherman stopped here to say to the genius, "You see what passed between the Greek king and the physician has just passed between us too." The Greek king, he went on, had no mercy on him, and the executioner bound his eyes. All those present begged for his life, but in vain. The physician on his knees and bound said to the king, "At least let me put my affairs in order, and leave my books to persons who will make good use of them. There is one which I should like to present to your majesty. It is very precious, and ought to be kept carefully in your treasury. It contains many curious things, the chief being that when you cut off my head, if your majesty will turn to the 6th leaf, and read the 3rd line of the left-hand page, my head will answer all the questions you like to ask it." The king, eager to see such a wonderful thing, put off his execution to the next day, and sent him under a strong guard to his house. There the physician put his affairs in order, and the next day there was a great crowd assembled in the hall to see his death and the doings after it. The physician went up to the foot of the throne with a large book in his hand. He carried a basin, on which he spread the covering of the book, and presenting it to the king, said, "Sire, take this book, and when my head is cut off, let it be placed in the basin on the covering of this book. As soon as it is there, the blood will cease to flow. Then open the book, and my head will answer your questions. But, sire, I implore your mercy, for I am innocent. Your prayers are useless, and if it were only to hear your head speak when you are dead, you should die." So saying, he took the book from the physician's hands and ordered the executioner to do his duty. The head was so cleverly cut off that it fell into the basin, and directly the blood ceased to flow. Then, to the great astonishment of the king, the eyes opened, and the head said, "Your Majesty, open the book." The king did so, and finding that the first leaf stuck against the second, he put his finger in his mouth to turn it more easily. He did the same thing till he reached the 6th page, and not seeing any writing on it, "Physician," he said, "there is no writing." "Turn over a few more pages," answered the head. The king went on turning, still putting his finger in his mouth, till the poison in which each page was dipped took effect. His sight failed him, and he fell at the foot of his throne. When the physician's head saw that the poison had taken effect, and that the king had only a few more minutes to live, "Tyrant," it cried, "see how cruelty and injustice are punished." Scarcely had it uttered these words than the king died, and the head lost also the little life that had remained in it. That is the end of the story of the Greek king. And now let us return to the fisherman and the genius. "If the Greek king," said the fisherman, "had spared the physician, he would not have thus died. The same thing applies to you. Now I am going to throw you into the sea." "My friend," said the genius, "do not do such a cruel thing. Do not treat me as Imma treated Ateka." "What did Imma do to Ateka?" asked the fisherman. "Do you think I can tell you while I am shut up in here?" replied the genius. "Let me out, and I will make you rich." The hope of being no longer poor made the fisherman give way. "If you will give me your promise to do this, I will open the lid. I do not think you will dare to break your word." The genius promised, and the fisherman lifted the lid. He came out at once in smoke, and then, having resumed his proper form, the first thing he did was to kick the vase into the sea. This frightened the fisherman, but the genius laughed and said, "Do not be afraid. I only did it to frighten you, and to show you that I intend to keep my word. Take your nets and follow me." He began to walk in front of the fisherman, who followed him with some misgivings. They passed in front of the town, and went up a mountain and then down into a great plain, where there was a large lake lying between 4 hills. When they reached the lake, the genius said to the fisherman, "Throw your nets and catch fish." The fisherman did as he was told, hoping for a good catch, as he saw plenty of fish. What was his astonishment at seeing that there were 4 quite different kinds, some white, some red, some blue, and some yellow. He caught 4, one of each color. As he had never seen any like them, he admired them very much, and he was very pleased to think how much money he would get for them. "Take these fish and carry them to the Sultan, who will give you more money for them than you have ever had in your life. You can come every day to fish in this lake, but be careful not to throw your nets more than once every day, otherwise some harm will happen to you. If you follow my advice carefully, you will find it good." Saying these words, he struck his foot against the ground, which opened, and when he had disappeared, it closed immediately. The fisherman resolved to obey the genius exactly, so he did not cast his nets a second time, but walked into the town to sell his fish at the palace. When the Sultan saw the fish, he was much astonished. He looked at them one after the other, and when he had admired them long enough, "Take these fish," he said to his first vizier, "and given them to the clever cook the emperor of the Greeks sent me. I think they must be as good as they are beautiful." The vizier took them himself to the cook, saying, "Here are 4 fish that have been brought to the Sultan. He wants you to cook them." Then he went back to the Sultan, who told him to give the fisherman 400 gold pieces. The fisherman, who had never before possessed such a large sum of money at once, could hardly believe his good fortune. He at once relieved the needs of his family and made good use of it. But now we must return to the kitchen, which we shall find in great confusion. The cook, when she had cleaned the fish, put them in a pan with some oil to fry them. When she thought them cooked enough on one side, she turned them on the other. But scarcely had she done so when the walls of the kitchen opened, and there came out a young and beautiful damsel. She was dressed in an Egyptian dress of flowered satin, and she wore earrings and a necklace of white pearls and bracelets of gold set with rubies, and she held a wand of myrtle in her hand. She went up to the pan, to the great astonishment of the cook, who stood motionless at the sight of her. She struck one of the fish with her rod. "Fish, fish," said she, "are you doing your duty?" The fish answered nothing, and then she repeated her question, whereupon they all raised their heads together and answered very distinctly, "Yes, yes. If you reckon, we reckon. If you pay your debts, we pay ours. If you fly, we conquer, and we are content." When they had spoken, the girl upset the pan and entered the opening in the wall, which at once closed and appeared the same as before. When the cook had recovered from her fright, she lifted up the fish which had fallen into the ashes, but she found them as black as cinders and not fit to serve up to the Sultan. She began to cry, "Alas, what shall I say to the Sultan? He will be so angry with me, and I know he will not believe me." Whilst she was crying, the Grand Vizier came in and asked if the fish were ready. She told him all that had happened, and he was much surprised. He sent at once for the fisherman, and when he came said to him, "Fisherman, bring me 4 more fish like you have brought already, for an accident has happened to them, so that they cannot be served up to the Sultan." The fisherman did not say what the genius had told him, but he excused himself from bringing them that day on account of the length of the way, and he promised to bring them next day. In the night he went to the lake, cast his nets, and on drawing them in found 4 fish, which were like the others, each of a different color. He went back at once and carried them to the Grand Vizier as he had promised. He then took them to the kitchen and shut himself up with the cook, who began to cook them as she had done the 4 others on the previous day. When she was about to turn them on the other side, the wall opened, the damsel appeared, addressed the same words to the fish, received the same answer, and then overturned the pan and disappeared. The Grand Vizier was filled with astonishment. "I shall tell the Sultan all that has happened," said he. And he did so. The Sultan was very much astounded and wished to see this marvel for himself. So he sent for the fisherman and asked him to procure 4 more fish. The fisherman asked for 3 days, which were granted, and he then cast his nets in the lake and again caught 4 different colored fish. The Sultan was delighted to see he had got them and gave him again 400 gold pieces. As soon as the Sultan had the fish, he had them carried to his room with all that was needed to cook them. Then he shut himself up with the Grand Vizier, who began to prepare them and cook them. When they were done on one side, he turned them over on the other. Then the wall of the room opened, but instead of the maiden, a black slave came out. He was enormously tall and carried a large green stick with which he touched the fish, saying in a terrible voice, "Fish, fish, are you doing your duty?" To these words the fish, lifting up their heads, replied, "Yes, yes. If you reckon, we reckon. If you pay your debts, we pay ours. If you fly, we conquer and are content." The black slave overturned the pan in the middle of the room, and the fish were turned to cinders. Then he stepped proudly back into the wall, which closed round him. "After having seen this," said the Sultan, "I cannot rest. These fish signify some mystery I must clear up." He sent for the fisherman. "Fisherman," he said, "the fish you have brought us have caused me some anxiety. Where did you get them from?" "Sire," he answered, "I got them from a lake which lies in the middle of 4 hills beyond yonder mountains." "Do you know this lake?" asked the Sultan of the Grand Vizier. "No, though I have hunted many times round that mountain, I have never heard of it," said the Vizier. As the fisherman said it was only 3 hours' journey away, the Sultan ordered his whole court to mount and ride thither, and the fisherman led them. They climbed the mountain, and then, on the other side, saw the lake as the fisherman had described. The water was so clear that they could see the 4 kinds of fish swimming about in it. They looked at them for some time, and then the Sultan ordered them to make a camp by the edge of the water. When night came, the Sultan called his Vizier and said to him, "I have resolved to clear up this mystery. I am going out alone, and do you stay here in my tent? And when my ministers come tomorrow, say I am not well and cannot see them. Do this each day till I return." The Grand Vizier tried to persuade the Sultan not to go, but in vain. The Sultan took off his state robe and put on his sword, and when he saw all was quiet in the camp, he set forth alone. He climbed one of the hills, and then crossed the great plain, till just as the sun rose, he beheld far in front of him a large building. When he came near to it, he saw it was a splendid palace of beautiful black polished marble, covered with steel as smooth as a mirror. He went to the gate, which stood half open, and went in, as nobody came when he knocked. He passed through a magnificent courtyard and still saw no one, though he called aloud several times. He entered large halls where the carpets were of silk, the lounges and sofas covered with tapestry from Mecca, and the hangings of the most beautiful Indian stuffs of gold and silver. Then he found himself in a splendid room, with a fountain supported by golden lions. The water out of the lions' mouths turned into diamonds and pearls, and the leaping water almost touched a most beautifully painted dome. The palace was surrounded on 3 sides by magnificent gardens, little lakes, and woods. Birds sang in the trees, which were netted over to keep them always there. Still the Sultan saw no one, till he heard a plaintive cry, and a voice which said, "Oh, that I could die, for I am too unhappy to wish to live any longer." The Sultan looked round to discover who it was who thus bemoaned his fate, and at last saw a handsome young man, richly clothed, who was sitting on a throne raised slightly from the ground. His face was very sad. The Sultan approached him and bowed to him. The young man bent his head very low, but did not rise. "Sire," he said to the Sultan, "I cannot rise and do you the reverence that I am sure should be paid to your rank." "Sir," answered the Sultan, "I am sure you have a good reason for not doing so, and having heard your cry of distress, I am come to offer you my help. Whose is this palace, and why is it thus empty?" Instead of answering, the young man lifted up his robe and showed the Sultan that, from the waist downwards, he was a block of black marble. The Sultan was horrified and begged the young man to tell him his story. "Willingly I will tell you my sad history," said the young man, "the story of the young king of the Black Isles. You must know, sire, that my father was Mahmud, the king of this country, the Black Isles, so called from the 4 little mountains which were once islands, while the capital was the place where now the great lake lies. My story will tell you how these changes came about. My father died when he was 66, and I succeeded him. I married my cousin, whom I loved tenderly, and I thought she loved me too. But one afternoon, when I was half asleep and was being fanned by 2 of her maids, I heard one say to the other, 'What a pity it is that our mistress no longer loves our master. I believe she would like to kill him if she could, for she is an enchantress.' I soon found by watching that they were right, and when I mortally wounded a favorite slave of hers for a great crime, she begged that she might build a palace in the garden, where she wept and bewailed him for 2 years. At last I begged her to cease grieving for him, for although he could not speak or move, by her enchantments she just kept him alive. She turned upon me in a rage, and said over me some magic words, and I instantly became, as you see me now, half man and half marble. Then this wicked enchantress changed the capital, which was a very populous and flourishing city, into the lake and desert plain you saw. The fish of 4 colors which are in it are the different races who lived in the town. The 4 hills are the 4 islands which give the name to my kingdom. All this the enchantress told me to add to my troubles. And this is not all. Every day she comes and beats me with a whip of buffalo hide." When the young king had finished his sad story, he burst once more into tears, and the Sultan was much moved. "Tell me," he cried, "where is this wicked woman, and where is the miserable object of her affection, whom she just manages to keep alive. Where she lives I do not know, answered the unhappy prince, but she goes every day at sunrise to see if the slave can yet speak to her, after she has beaten me. Unfortunate king, said the sultan, I will do what I can to avenge you. So he consulted with the young king over the best way to bring this about, and they agreed their plan should be put in effect the next day. The sultan then rested, and the young king gave himself up to happy hopes of release. The next day the sultan arose, and then went to the palace in the garden where the black slave was. He drew his sword and destroyed the little life that remained in him, and then threw the body down a well. He then lay down on the couch where the slave had been, and waited for the enchantress. She went first to the young king, whom she beat with 100 blows. Then she came to the room where she thought her wounded slave was, but where the sultan really lay. She came near his couch and said, Are you better today, my dear slave? Speak but one word to me. How can I be better? Answered the sultan, imitating the language of the Ethiopians, when I can never sleep for the cries and groans of your husband. What joy to hear you speak, answered the queen. Do you wish him to regain his proper shape? Yes, said the sultan. Hasten to set him at liberty, so that I may no longer hear his cries. The queen at once went out and took a cup of water, and said over it some words that made it boil as if it were on the fire. Then she threw it over the prince, who at once regained his own form. He was filled with joy, but the enchantress said, Hasten away from this place and never come back, lest I kill you. So he hid himself to see the end of the sultan's plan. The enchantress went back to the palace of tears and said, Now I have done what you wished. What you have done, said the sultan, is not enough to cure me. Every day at midnight all the people whom you have changed into fish lift their heads out of the lake and cry for vengeance. Go quickly and give them their proper shape. The enchantress hurried away and said some words over the lake. The fish then became men, women, and children, and the houses and shops were once more filled. The sultan's suite, who had encamped by the lake, were not a little astonished to see themselves in the middle of a large and beautiful town. As soon as she had disenchanted it, the queen went back to the palace. Are you quite well now? She said. Come near, said the sultan. Nearer still. She obeyed. Then he sprang up, and with one blow of his sword he cut her in two. Then he went and found the prince. Rejoice, he said, your cruel enemy is dead. The prince thanked him again and again. And now, said the sultan, I will go back to my capital, which I am glad to find is so near yours. So near mine, said the king of the Black Isles. Do you know it is a whole year's journey from here? You came here in a few hours because it was enchanted, but I will accompany you on your journey. It will give me much pleasure if you will escort me, said the sultan, and as I have no children, I will make you my heir. The sultan and the prince set out together, the sultan laden with rich presents from the king of the Black Isles. The day after he reached his capital, the sultan assembled his court and told them all that had befallen him, and told them how he intended to adopt the young king as his heir. Then he gave each man presents in proportion to his rank. As for the fisherman, as he was the first cause of the deliverance of the young prince, the sultan gave him much money, and made him and his family happy for the rest of their days. The story of the 3 calendars, sons of kings, and of 5 ladies of Baghdad. In the reign of the Caliph Harun al-Rashid, there lived at Baghdad a porter who, in spite of his humble calling, was an intelligent and sensible man. One morning he was sitting in his usual place with his basket before him, waiting to be hired, when a tall young lady, covered with a long muslin veil, came up to him and said, "Pick up your basket and follow me." The porter, who was greatly pleased by her appearance and voice, jumped up at once, poised his basket on his head, and accompanied the lady, saying to himself as he went, "Oh, happy day! Oh, lucky meeting!" The lady soon stopped before a closed door, at which she knocked. It was opened by an old man with a long white beard, to whom the lady held out money without speaking. The old man, who seemed to understand what she wanted, vanished into the house, and returned bringing a large jar of wine, which the porter placed in his basket. Then the lady signed to him to follow, and they went their way. The next place she stopped at was a fruit and flower shop, and here she bought a large quantity of apples, apricots, peaches, and other things, with lilies, jasmine, and all sorts of sweet-smelling plants. From this shop she went to a butcher's, a grocer's, and a poulterer's, till at last the porter exclaimed in despair, "My good lady, if you had only told me you were going to buy enough provisions to stock a town, I would have brought a horse, or rather a camel." The lady laughed and told him she had not finished yet, but after choosing various kinds of scents and spices from a druggist's store, she halted before a magnificent palace, at the door of which she knocked gently. The porteress who opened it was of such beauty that the eyes of the man were quite dazzled, and he was the more astonished as he saw clearly that she was no slave. The lady who had led him hither stood watching him with amusement, till the porteress exclaimed, "Why don't you come in, my sister? This poor man is so heavily weighed down that he is ready to drop." When they were both inside, the door was fastened, and they all three entered a large court, surrounded by an open-work gallery. At one end of the court was a platform, and on the platform stood an amber throne supported by 4 ebony columns, garnished with pearls and diamonds. In the middle of the court stood a marble basin filled with water from the mouth of a golden lion. The porter looked about him, noticing and admiring everything, but his attention was specially attracted by a third lady sitting on the throne, who was even more beautiful than the other two. By the respect shown to her by the others, he judged that she must be the eldest, and in this he was right. This lady's name was Zobeida, the porteress was Sadie, and the housekeeper was Amina. At a word from Zobeida, Sadie and Amina took the basket from the porter, who was glad enough to be relieved from its weight, and when it was emptied, paid him handsomely for its use. But instead of taking up his basket and going away, the man still lingered, till Zobeida inquired what he was waiting for, and if he expected more money. "Oh, madam," returned he, "you have already given me too much, and I fear I may have been guilty of rudeness in not taking my departure at once. But if you will pardon my saying so, I was lost in astonishment at seeing such beautiful ladies by themselves. A company of women without men is, however, as dull as a company of men without women." And after telling some stories to prove his point, he ended by entreating them to let him stay and make a 4th at their dinner. The ladies were rather amused at the man's assurances, and after some discussion it was agreed that he should be allowed to stay, as his society might prove entertaining. "But listen, friend," said Zobeida, "if we grant your request, it is only on condition that you behave with the utmost politeness, and that you keep the secret of our way of living, which chance has revealed to you." Then they all sat down to table, which had been covered by Amina with the dishes she had bought. After the first few mouthfuls, Amina poured some wine into a golden cup. She first drank herself, according to the Arab custom, and then filled it for her sisters. When it came to the porter's turn, he kissed Amina's hand and sang a song, which he composed at the moment in praise of the wine. The 3 ladies were pleased with the song, and then sang themselves, so that the repast was a merry one, and lasted much longer than usual. At length, seeing that the sun was about to set, Sadia said to the porter, "Rise and go. It is now time for us to separate." "Oh, madam," replied he, "how can you desire me to quit you in the state in which I am? Between the wine I have drunk and the pleasure of seeing you, I should never find the way to my house. Let me remain here till morning, and when I have recovered my senses, I will go when you like." "Let him stay," said Amina, who had before proved herself his friend. "It is only just, as he has given us so much amusement." "If you wish it, my sister," replied Zobeida. "But if he does, I must make a new condition. Porter," she continued, turning to him, "if you remain, you must promise to ask no questions about anything you may see. If you do, you may perhaps hear what you don't like." This being settled, Amina brought in supper, and lit up the hall with a number of sweet-smelling tapers. They then sat down again at the table, and began with fresh appetites to eat, drink, sing, and recite verses. In fact, they were all enjoying themselves mightily when they heard a knock at the outer door, which Sadie rose to open. She soon returned saying that 3 calendars, all blind in the right eye, and all with their heads, faces, and eyebrows clean shaved, begged for admittance, as they were newly arrived in Baghdad, and night had already fallen. "They seem to have pleasant manners," she added, "but you have no idea how funny they look. I am sure we should find their company diverting." Zobeida and Amina made some difficulty about admitting the newcomers, and Sadie knew the reason of their hesitation. But she urged the matter so strongly that Zobeida was at last forced to consent. "Bring them in, then," said she, "but make them understand that they are not to make remarks about what does not concern them, and be sure to make them read the inscription over the door." For on the door was written in letters of gold, "Whoso meddles in affairs that are no business of his, will hear truths that will not please him." The 3 calendars bowed low on entering, and thanked the ladies for their kindness and hospitality. The ladies replied with words of welcome, and they were all about to seat themselves when the eyes of the calendars fell on the porter, whose dress was not so very unlike their own, though he still wore all the hair that nature had given him. "This," said one of them, "is apparently one of our Arab brothers, who has rebelled against our ruler." The porter, although half asleep from the wine he had drunk, heard the words, and without moving cried angrily to the calendar, "Sit down and mind your own business. Did you not read the inscription over the door? Everybody is not obliged to live in the same way." "Do not be so angry, my good man," replied the calendar. "We should be very sorry to displease you." So the quarrel was smoothed over, and supper began in good earnest. When the calendars had satisfied their hunger, they offered to play to their hostesses, if there were any instruments in the house. The ladies were delighted at the idea, and Sadie went to see what she could find, returning in a few moments laden with 2 different kinds of flutes and a tambourine. Each calendar took the one he preferred, and began to play a well-known air, while the ladies sang the words of the song. These words were the gayest and liveliest possible, and every now and then the singers had to stop to indulge the laughter which almost choked them. In the midst of all their noise, a knock was heard at the door. Now early that evening the Caliph secretly left the palace, accompanied by his Grand Vizier, Giafar, and Mesrer, chief of the eunuchs, all 3 wearing the dresses of merchants. Passing down the street, the Caliph had been attracted by the music of instruments and the sound of laughter, and had ordered his Vizier to go and knock at the door of the house, as he wished to enter. The Vizier replied that the ladies who lived there seemed to be entertaining their friends, and he thought his master would do well not to intrude on them. But the Caliph had taken it into his head to see for himself, and insisted on being obeyed. The knock was answered by Sadie, with a taper in her hand, and the Vizier, who was surprised at her beauty, bowed low before her, and said respectfully, "Madam, we are 3 merchants who have lately arrived from Musal, and owing to a misadventure which befell us this very night, only reached our inn to find that the doors were closed to us till tomorrow morning. Not knowing what to do, we wandered in the streets till we happened to pass your house, when, seeing lights and hearing the sound of voices, we resolved to ask you to give us shelter till the dawn. If you will grant us this favor, we will, with your permission, do all in our power to help you spend the time pleasantly." Sadie answered the merchant that she must first consult her sisters, and after having talked over the matter with them, she returned to tell him that he and his 2 friends would be welcome to join their company. They entered and bowed politely to the ladies and their guests. Then Zobeida, as the mistress, came forward and said gravely, "You are welcome here, but I hope you will allow me to beg one thing of you: have as many eyes as you like, but no tongues, and ask no questions about anything you see, however strange it may appear to you." "Madam," returned the Vizier, "you shall be obeyed. We have quite enough to please and interest us without troubling ourselves about that with which we have no concern." Then they all sat down and drank to the health of the newcomers. While the Vizier, Giafar, was talking to the ladies, the Caliph was occupied in wondering who they could be, and why the 3 calendars had each lost his right eye. He was burning to inquire the reason of it all, but was silenced by Zobeida's request. So he tried to rouse himself and to take his part in the conversation, which was very lively, the subject of discussion being the many different sorts of pleasures that there were in the world. After some time the calendars got up and performed some curious dances, which delighted the rest of the company. When they had finished, Zobeida rose from her seat, and taking Amina by the hand, she said to her, "My sister, our friends will excuse us if we seem to forget their presence and fulfill our nightly task." Amina understood her sister's meaning, and collecting the dishes, glasses, and musical instruments, she carried them away, while Sadie swept the hall and put everything in order. Having done this, she begged the calendars to sit on a sofa on one side of the room, and the Caliph and his friends to place themselves opposite. As to the porter, she requested him to come and help her and her sister. Shortly after, Amina entered carrying a seat, which she put down in the middle of the empty space. She next went over to the door of a closet and signed to the porter to follow her. He did so, and soon reappeared leading 2 black dogs by a chain, which he brought into the center of the hall. Zobeida then got up from her seat between the calendars and the Caliph and walked slowly across to where the porter stood with the dogs. "We must do our duty," she said with a deep sigh, pushing back her sleeves, and taking a whip from Sadie, she said to the man, "Take one of those dogs to my sister Amina and give me the other." The porter did as he was bid, But as he led the dog to Zobeida, it uttered piercing howls and gazed up at her with looks of entreaty. But Zobeida took no notice and whipped the dog till she was out of breath. She then took the chain from the porter, and raising the dog on its hind legs, they looked into each other's eyes sorrowfully till tears began to fall from both. Then Zobeida took her handkerchief and wiped the dog's eyes tenderly, after which she kissed it. Then, putting the chain into the porter's hand, she said, "Take it back to the closet and bring me the other." The same ceremony was gone through with the second dog, and all the while the whole company looked on with astonishment. The caliph in particular could hardly contain himself, and made signs to the vizier to ask what it all meant. But the vizier pretended not to see, and turned his head away. Zobeida remained for some time in the middle of the room, till at last Sadie went up to her and begged her to sit down, as she also had her part to play. At these words Amina fetched a lute from a case of yellow satin and gave it to Sadie, who sang several songs to its accompaniment. When she was tired, she said to Amina, "My sister, I can do no more. Come, I pray you, and take my place." Amina struck a few chords and then broke into a song, which she sang with so much ardor that she was quite overcome, and sank gasping on a pile of cushions, tearing open her dress as she did so to give herself some air. To the amazement of all present, her neck, instead of being as smooth and white as her face, was a mass of scars. The calendars and the caliph looked at each other and whispered together, unheard by Zobeida and Sadie, who were tending their fainting sister. "What does it all mean?" asked the caliph. "We know no more than you," said the calender to whom he had spoken. "What? You do not belong to the house?" "My lord," answered all the calendars together, "we came here for the first time an hour before you." They then turned to the porter to see if he could explain the mystery, but the porter was no wiser than they were themselves. At length the caliph could contain his curiosity no longer, and declared that he would compel the ladies to tell them the meaning of their strange conduct. The vizier, foreseeing what would happen, implored him to remember the condition their hostesses had imposed, and added in a whisper that if his highness would only wait till morning, he could as caliph summon the ladies to appear before him. But the caliph, who was not accustomed to be contradicted, rejected this advice, and it was resolved after a little more talking that the question should be put by the porter. Suddenly Zobeida turned round, and seeing their excitement, she said, "What is the matter? What are you all discussing so earnestly?" "Madam," answered the porter, "these gentlemen entreat you to explain to them why you should first whip the dogs and then cry over them, and also how it happens that the fainting lady is covered with scars. They have requested me, madam, to be their mouthpiece." "Is it true, gentlemen," asked Zobeida, drawing herself up, "that you have charged this man to put me that question?" "It is," they all replied, except Giafar, who was silent. "Is this," continued Zobeida, growing more angry every moment, "is this the return you make for the hospitality I have shown you? Have you forgotten the one condition on which you were allowed to enter the house? Come quickly," she added, clapping her hands 3 times, and the words were hardly uttered when 7 black slaves, each armed with a saber, burst in and stood over the 7 men, throwing them on the ground and preparing themselves, on a sign from their mistress, to cut off their heads. The 7 culprits all thought their last hour had come, and the caliph repented bitterly that he had not taken the vizier's advice. But they made up their minds to die bravely, all except the porter, who loudly inquired of Zobeida why he was to suffer for other people's faults, and declared that these misfortunes would never have happened if it had not been for the calendars, who always brought ill luck. He ended by imploring Zobeida not to confound the innocent with the guilty and to spare his life. In spite of her anger, there was something so comic in the groans of the porter that Zobeida could not refrain from laughing. But putting him aside, she addressed the others a second time, saying, "Answer me. Who are you? Unless you tell me truly, you have not another moment to live. I can hardly think you are men of any position, whatever country you belong to. If you were, you would have had more consideration for us." The caliph, who was naturally very impatient, suffered far more than either of the others at feeling that his life was at the mercy of a justly offended lady. But when he heard her question, he began to breathe more freely, for he was convinced that she had only to learn his name and rank for all danger to be over. So he whispered hastily to the vizier, who was next to him, to reveal their secret. But the vizier, wiser than his master, wished to conceal from the public the affront they had received, and merely answered, "After all, we have only got what we deserved." Meanwhile, Zobeida had turned to the 3 calendars and inquired if, as they were all blind, they were brothers. "No, madam," replied one. "We are no blood relations at all, only brothers by our mode of life." "And you?" she asked, addressing another. "Were you born blind of one eye?" "No, madam," returned he. "I became blind through a most surprising adventure, such as probably has never happened to anybody. After that I shaved my head and eyebrows and put on the dress in which you see me now." Zobeida put the same question to the other 2 calendars, and received the same answer. "But," added the third, "it may interest you, madam, to know that we are not men of low birth, but are all 3 sons of kings, and of kings too, whom the world holds in high esteem." At these words Zobeida's anger cooled down, and she turned to her slaves and said, "You can give them a little more liberty, but do not leave the hall. Those that will tell us their histories and their reasons for coming here shall be allowed to leave unhurt. Those who refuse—" And she paused, but in a moment the porter, who understood that he had only to relate his story to set himself free from this terrible danger, immediately broke in. "Madam, you know already how I came here, and what I have to say will soon be told. Your sister found me this morning in the place where I always stand waiting to be hired. She bade me follow her to various shops, and when my basket was quite full we returned to this house, when you had the goodness to permit me to remain, for which I shall be eternally grateful. That is my story." He looked anxiously to Zobeida, who nodded her head and said, "You can go, and take care we never meet again." "Oh, madam," cried the porter, "let me stay yet a little while. It is not just that the others should have heard my story and that I should not hear theirs." And without waiting for permission, he seated himself on the end of the sofa occupied by the ladies, whilst the rest crouched on the carpet, and the slaves stood against the wall. Then one of the calendars, addressing himself to Zobeida as the principal lady, began his story.